Hello everyone and welcome back to the second session of day 2 of CogX 2020. My name is Amy French. I am your MC for the day today. Thank you for joining us on the FinTech and Future of Financial Services stage. Throughout the day, whilst you're online, please don't forget to kind of get involved in the conversation and tweet using the hashtag CogX 2020 whilst you're here. So next up, we've got a session called Bridging the Information Gap, Data for Responsible Business. Now, moderating this discussion will be Sophia Adams-Bhatti. Can I welcome Sophia online?
Hi, Amy, and hi, everyone in the audience.
Hi, Sophia. Thank you so much for joining us. I will hand over to you to introduce yourself and introduce your guests. Have a great session.
Thank you. And hi, everyone, to this afternoon's session. And thank you so much for joining us. Bridging the Information Gap and Data for Responsible Business. Why this session and why the guests that we have today? Well, this session encompasses two of the biggest themes which I think have been dominating at least my world for the last couple of years, and they certainly have dominated the discourse in business, and that is the discourse around data and its power and the ability to do some amazing things with data and also do some quite harmful things with data, but let's focus on the positive today. But also the emerging discourse around responsible business. And what this session is about blending those two into a way for action that can actually help us use data to drive positive policy outcomes. Why is it important? Well, let me tell you a little bit about my own journey to this point. I think that's probably a way of telling a story that makes some sense. I spent the last 20, maybe a little bit longer, the grey hair probably gives you a bit of a hint, in policy making in one way or another across a number of regulators. But also, over the last few years, I've spent a lot of time with the tech fraternity. And last year, I decided that sitting inside one discipline wasn't actually going to solve any of the problems I was trying to tackle. But rather what I needed to really do was to blend what I knew was the policy framework, the long-term objectives that we hold dear, whether they be enshrined in the SDGs or any of the subcomponent parts of that, but to deliver that in combination, side by side with a tech team. And so I joined Simmons Wavelength, which is a legal engineering company, a startup back in summer last year, recently acquired by Simmons, the law firm. And I joined in order to drive forward this unique blend of policy, law, and data science. Now, ask me in a couple of years whether or not that works, but in actual fact, to the forefront of our pipeline of activity is to focus on blending those three to see whether or not we can make a difference on SDGs. Hardwiring that into our thinking, so that the data science is as informed by the policy, and our policy and legal work is as informed by data, and using that to really drive positive outcomes. And to help us in that journey today, on this panel, I have some amazing speakers. We've got an hour, we're going to speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have a 30-minute Q&A. And what we aim to do in this next hour is to look at three component parts of this. First of all, a reminder, what do we actually mean by responsible business? And Colin is going to talk a little bit about that, drawing on his work at the British Academy and his work at Said, which has actually given many of us a taxonomy to talk about these things in a way that really resonates with the C-suite and with shareholder value, makes it compatible for a modern corporate world. We're also going to look at what does it actually feel like to lead an organization, to be a member of a senior leadership team, where your mission is very much hardwired into either the ESGs or indeed any form of purpose-driven profit motive. And Shanika is going to talk to us a little bit about that. And then finally, the crux of it all, which is what can you really use that data to tell you? How can you use that data in a way that really is effective? And in that, Alexandra is going to share her experience. So in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Colin, and we will then have a few minutes from each of our speakers before we have a little bit of a Q&A as a fireside chat before we open up to you as an audience. And I'm conscious that in the audience, we have a real mix of people. We might have fintech startups wanting to enter this space. We might have incumbents who are thinking, how do I turn the tanker around? And we might have those who are investing in businesses too. So we're going to try and cover all of those in some way, shape or form. But please do leave your questions in the Slido Q&A portal, because we really want to make this as interactive as possible. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to Colin.
Sophia, thank you very much indeed. And let me just start off by quoting from Larry Fink, the CEO and president of one of the largest investment management businesses in the world, BlackRock, when he said that every business needs to have a purpose, not a strapline or a marketing campaign, but a statement of its fundamental reason for being, what it does on a daily basis. Purpose, he said, is not the sole pursuit of profits, but the animating force for achieving them. And since then, we've had similar statements by the Business Roundtable, by the World Economic Forum, by the Financial Times, its new agenda, Capitalism, Time for a Reset. It's no longer a question of whether or why we need to have a focus of business on purpose. It's a question of what and how. What exactly do we mean by corporate purpose? Purpose is not simply the pursuit of profits. Purpose is solving the problems that you and I face as individuals, societies, and the natural world, and to do so in a way that is commercially viable. So a way of thinking about what corporate purpose is that it is about producing profitable solutions to the problems of people and planet, and not to profit from producing problems for people or planet. Now, that is neither a woolly nor a diffuse concept. It's precise. It's precise about what problems companies should be solving, for whom, how they should be solving them, and why those companies are particularly well suited to solving those problems. Now, to give you a quick illustration of it, a company called Novo Nordisk, which is a Danish pharmaceutical company, went through a journey of discovering what its purpose was. It's a company that produces insulin used in the treatment of type 2 diabetes. It started off thinking its purpose was simply to produce insulin. But then it realized actually that wasn't really its purpose. Its purpose was to help people treat type 2 diabetes. And it worked with various parties like doctors and hospitals around the world to identify the best forms of treatment. Then it realized that actually its purpose was a bit more than that. And that was to help people avoid getting type 2 diabetes in the first place. So it worked with governments, local authorities, health workers to identify the changes in lifestyle that would help people avoid getting type 2 diabetes. Now, what that illustrates is the importance of having a clear notion of what the purpose of a business is. And it also brings out a second point, and that is that on the back of discovering that, Novo Nordisk did not extinguish its business model, as you might think it would if it got rid of type 2 diabetes. It found its business booming because it built up relations of trust with those various parties, doctors, hospitals, governments, local authorities around the world. And it's become a trusted supplier of those to a vast number of countries and governments. Now, to achieve that type of outcome, there are three things that are really critically necessary. The first is leadership. Leadership of organizations that inspire them to promote those corporate purposes and ensure that they're firmly embedded throughout their organizations. The second is the corporate governance, the role of the board in promoting a corporate purpose and ensuring that it's aligned with the strategy and the values of the business and its culture. And the third is in terms of the measurement of the extent to which a company is delivering on its purpose. Because to establish that a company is fulfilling its purpose, one has to go beyond conventional ways of looking at company performance in terms of their profits to recognize the impact that they are having on the world around them, on their employees, on the people in their supply chain, on their environment, and on their societies in general. And that is involving collecting new sources of data that traditionally companies, accountants, analysts have not developed. And those new sources of data involve new forms of collecting that information. And that's where technology can play a vital role. For example, in relation to natural capital and the environment, the role that satellite information is playing in terms of accumulating information about the nature of our habitats around the world, the condition of them, is advancing at a very rapid pace. And these forms of information gathering will greatly enhance the ability of companies, of investors, and of societies and regulators to ensure that they are really delivering on company purposes. But there are risks as well as advantages associated with it. Take, for example, artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence offers tremendous opportunities for enhancing our ability to analyze that data through extremely powerful computing techniques. And as such, it's a very valuable tool for companies to take decisions and to demonstrate that they are delivering on their purposes. But we're also observing the use of that artificial intelligence moving beyond that, not only in terms of helping organizations and individuals to take decisions, but beginning to take decisions for them. There's one obvious illustration of this where this has already happened in large order, and that is in financial markets. The emergence of program trading, by which essentially machines make decisions about the buying and selling of stock and the forms of high-frequency trading, are illustrations of the way in which computers are beginning to substitute for humans, not only in processing data, but acting on that data. Now, the concern that that raises is that it begins to take the human element out of decision-taking. That's basically what has happened in terms of portfolio decision-taking by machines. And it's going to move elsewhere. For example, we're going to see increasingly the use of artificial intelligence, not only in helping boardrooms to evaluate a large amount of data, but we'll see them beginning to take decisions for those boardrooms. Now that then raises very significant questions about the ways in which those machines are programmed, by whom, and in particular, for what purpose. And the notion then of corporate purpose gains increasing significance as we begin to move in a direction of replacing human decision-taking with artificial intelligence decision-taking in a way in which could be extremely beneficial for society and us if the purpose to which it's put reflects our interests as individuals, humans, and society.
Colin, thank you. And I think that has provoked so many potential questions. I'm hoping that the Q&A session will pick up on so many of those. And I think it's really important to hold some of these macro concepts in our minds. I'm going to turn to Shanika, to you next, actually, because if you take the basic premise of Colin's description there of every business needs a purpose, well, actually, you are set up as the British Business Bank, of which you're the GC, I should let others know, with a very distinct purpose. And you're going to tell us a little bit about how it feels to be part of the leadership team of an organisation with such a mission and what it feels like to be living that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sophia. And firstly, thanks, everyone. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you today about a topic that is so pertinent in today's day and age. And as Sophia mentioned, and following on from Colin's insights on the work he's been doing around the purpose of business in the modern world, what I wanted to do was to talk about what we've been doing on this front at the British Business Bank to share the context of being part of a leadership team of an organization that is heavily led by its purpose and has a strong mission, but also the challenges that we face around data and trying to measure that. So just a little bit of background and context about the British Business Bank. We were set up in 2014 following the financial crisis, which saw governments having to bail out large financial institutions. Now, given that backdrop, there was always a very clear mission statement which has driven us at the bank, and that is to help drive economic growth by making finance markets work better for smaller business, wherever they are in the UK and whatever the stage of development. So that probably gives you some clues around the British Business Bank if you didn't know who we were already. And to add a bit more colour, we're essentially the UK government's development bank to support access to finance for smaller business. And the bank plays a vital role in development in the country because SME smaller businesses make up 99% of the UK's business population by number. And in particular, in the current COVID-19 economic response, the role of the bank has become even more critical because we've been supporting businesses from the startup end of the spectrum right through to larger businesses through schemes such as the Bounce Back Loan Scheme, the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, and most recently the Future Fund, which provides equity support to businesses who are in need of it during the current crisis. Now, what all of this highlights is that our core purpose feeds directly into a number of the Sustainable Development Goals, the most direct being SDG 9, which is the goal around industry, innovation, and infrastructure. But we don't stop there. We also contribute indirectly to SDG 1, alleviating poverty, 10 around reduced inequalities, 11 around sustainable communities, quality education, gender equality, and many more. And that depends really on which businesses we ultimately support. Therefore, the SDGs are a wholly relevant framework for us in thinking about how we deliver and what our value is to the economy. As an organization, we were born out of the desire to rebalance the distribution of wealth and opportunity. And that rationale and commitment still resonates within our culture as a team and as part of the senior leadership team and the executive team. It's something that we live and breathe every day. We are a commercially savvy business, but our purpose really does guide what we do as an institution and the decisions that we make. And while we're not that mature as an institution, being founded in 2014, what we're in the midst of doing right now is designing what is our ESG strategy for the business bank going forward, and what role do we have to play around ESG, and similar to many other institutions, how to assess our impact in the market is as fraught as any other business when it comes to measuring impact around ESGs and SDGs. And I don't proclaim in any way that we've fixed it, but rather what I wanted to share at this point is how we're tackling our ambition and to truly understand our impact so that we can improve. And as Colin says, we want to actively support businesses which do good things for people and planet. We have a vision at the British Business Bank to be a global leader, not driven by ego and because that's what we believe we were set up to do, but because actually we believe it's incumbent on institutions who have a clear purpose and mission like the BBB to demonstrate leadership, to help pave the way and to set a trajectory of travel for the entire financial services sector. And what we're trying to do in doing that is to create an approach to measuring our impact, not just internally as a business, but also our full impact through to the front line, through our delivery partners that we work with, all financial institutions and fund managers, all the way to the actual end businesses that we help support. We're very conscious that this is ambitious and will take time, and are also very thoughtful around the reality that success in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and an ESG strategy is not going to be delivered through a press release, but has to be long term. And to make meaningful changes requires real commitment, time, and effort. And in addition to commitment, time, and effort, I wanted to add another component to this as we live and breathe right now as an institution trying to operationalize ESG, which is innovation. What we want to do is to use the best approaches available. And case studies are great. They tell a story, but they do lack objectivity, reliability, auditability, and the transparency that we're looking for. Historically, businesses get to an end of year report, an annual report, and the approach tends to be somewhat ad hoc to collecting information about impact. And we don't believe this is either efficient or effective. And year-to-year analysis is normally compromised. The process is painful, it's resource intensive and slow. And because the information isn't systematically captured, it tends to have gaps in it. And I've been talking to Sophia and her team at Simmons Wavelength and the work that they've been doing around data science. And we've been working closely with them around our ESG strategy. It's been timely because we do believe that data science and data capabilities are what we need to harness to really put together something which has a long-term vision and strategy to it. That data approach is definitely a harder process. It takes time to understand what data is needed, what data do we have, what data don't we have, and how are we going to get it. And that's even from an organization like the British Business Bank, who's been in existence since 2014, so not that long. Quite quickly, data gets entrenched and architecture around data gets entrenched. And it's easy to tell a subjective story, but what we want to do is to really gather the evidence because we want the integrity of it. And even more importantly, to do so in the real time to affect actual decisions. And this needs a systematic approach. So we've been working, as I said, with Sophia and the team at Simmons Wavelength, and we've had to start at the start. We revisited our strategy vision around ESG. We're not really interested in what is the former whitewashing maybe of CSR initiatives. What we wanted to do was to make this really core to our way of operating, and we wanted to align our data architecture to support that. What we've ended up doing, because we're early days on our journey on this, is rather than trying to boil the ocean, we've started with a selection of ESG criteria as our starting point. And we will, over the coming years, build a more detailed and comprehensive approach. But each phase will build on one before. And each time I'm confident that the decisions we're making as we move forward are going to be informed by the most reliable data that we can get about what our ESG posture should be. And what we've started with, just to give you a flavor of actually how small steps do make a difference, is we've split out into E, S, and G. So on E, on environment, we're focusing on our approach to travel, our approach to waste and pollution, our approach to carbon emissions. Governance is an important one for us as a public body. We've focused on managing public money because we're funded by taxpayer funding. We've focused on our approach to openness and transparency, really high standards around anti-bribery and corruption, diversity around the board from a governance perspective, and culture as a governance lever. And on the social aspects, we've been really focused around gender pay gap, our approach to diversity and inclusion internally as well as externally. We have a core mandate, which is about regional economic equality, and we're going to focus on that as our starting point. Modern slavery and making sure that we're establishing best practices around legislation and regulation there. Employee well-being, in particular in the current COVID-19 lockdown, we've turned to these social ESG criteria that we built recently to really set the tone of how we treat employees and the way we focus on their well-being, as well as around broader data ethics issues under the social heading of ESG. And I think we're very conscious it's just not going to be possible to go from zero to hero in one day. It's certainly a journey, but by using data science to help us, I am certain that we will be able to make a real change happen. But we're going to take our time to do this because we want to do it well, while also being conscious that perfection ought not be the enemy of the good. And if there isn't direct data about a particular issue, that doesn't mean that we won't address the issue and we won't just stop there. But we need to find a proportionate way to gather insights so that the decision making is based on evidence. Just by way of background, there's some recent research that we've done that all feeds into the topic around purpose and how we're trying to set our strategy around ESG and SDGs for the future, but also how important data is. a number of reports that we did in the past few years. One was around female founders and gender equality. And the 2018 report that we published on female founders demonstrates that for every £1 of venture capital investment in the UK, all female founder teams get less than pence, and all male founder teams get 89p, with mixed gender teams getting 10p. And the reason I'm using that as an illustration is just to show that without the data on issues such as gender equality and diversity, it's quite hard to pull a story together and know what the future strategy should be for an organization such as ours. So relying on data is a really key component of how we're setting our strategy around ESG. Fundamentally, whether the data tells us a positive story or negative story, I believe that it's vital that we have a systemic, up-to-date way of knowing whether the actions that we're taking are having the impact that we intended or not. And we can all choose to turn left or right, but that's a pointless decision if you don't really have the knowledge whether there's data on where you are and where you want to be. Thank you.
Shanika, thank you. And that was really insightful to really feel the mission behind BBB's work in this space, and this, music to my ears around the nature and the power of using data effectively and well. But not all data is made equal, and sometimes you need a little bit more insight about what data can do and what data can't do, and what the experience is of those who are at the cutting edge of using data in these sorts of ways of measuring impact. And there, Alexandra, hopefully you can hear me. I know we've had a little bit of a tech.
I can hear you.
Wiggle. Brilliant. Lovely. Now, share with us your experience, because actually, we've gone from the macro picture of purpose. We've lived Shanika's life for a few moments. Tell us a little bit about your experience around using data. What can we really use this data for? What are the pitfalls? What would your wise wisdom be?
Well, I mean, so thank you, by the way, for having me on the panel and being here at CogX. It's great to be indoors. Last year we were in the rain outdoors, but we're sort of sitting here shielded from that this year. I think that I just want to sort of pick up both on what Colin and Shanika said, because essentially we have built an index to try and capture the sort of the purpose element that Colin put forward, and sort of create an index around all of the elements that Shanika outlined so brilliantly before. And we went about this with asking ourselves really two questions, which was, how do we, when we're looking at the SDGs and we're looking at them, today with 2030 is very close, how do we create a bit more urgency around what, not only what nations can do, but what corporations and big corporations can do, and individuals. But we started with the big corporations and said, as they are ever growing, and we feel that they might have been, involved in the conversation, but maybe not particularly, measured in terms of what they are contributing on the SDGs. We thought we would go about that, trying to actually, as Shanika said, it feels a little bit like boiling the ocean, but that's what we went ahead and did. The other thing was that we were trying to structure, there are a lot of measurements out there on ESG and looking at the whole sort of agenda around that, and ones that do it very well. And we were thinking, what does an index, an index is always supposed to create or inspire a race to the top, to nudge behavior so it changes policies internally, culture internally, a drive to try and achieve better, to be able to follow a company on that journey of improvement. But how do we create, so in a sense, the structure of an index sort of inherently does that. But what we were trying to tease out is trying to sort of put some urgency in that debate more, and it is very urgent and everyone's very aware of it. So we looked at, so what are the companies saying they're doing versus what they're doing? And so the structure of the Responsibility 100 Index that we published earlier this year in January looked at the walk versus the talk and the gap between the two of the FTSE 100, and saying, essentially, look, it's great to have made commitments, and that's important. The SDGs stipulate that committing to them and reporting on them and being transparent about that reporting is great. So it's not that we didn't weigh the talk in the index, we did. But when we looked at mapping the performance of what was committed to by the companies, we looked at, so what actually is behind the commitments? Are companies actually following up on what they're saying they're doing? And we found that actually was quite a nice way to frame it, because looking at the gap between the two might start some debate, and it has within the companies, but also from the general population, looking at actually it's time to move a bit faster on this agenda. And of course, the third natural pillar lying alongside would be a run pillar, looking at like how quickly do we actually need to make that change in order to reach the SDGs by 2030. So that's something that we're looking to add. I know we're a little bit tight for time, Sophia, but if I just could make a few more points here in terms of just the data collection, because both Colin and Shanika point out that we are in a time, and we acutely aware that we are in a time that we can collect data differently, that we can tap into data sources that haven't been available some years ago, and that is very much what our index rests on. More than half of our data points are pulled from big global data sets, international tribunals. Shanika mentioned that the modern slavery acts and human rights issues, and sort of where they get raised, and looking at companies and all the way through their supply chains, looking at issues like tax havens, and of course the whole spectrum of equality, and looking closely at the gender issues as well. About 10,000 data points go into our index. We pull them from all kinds of sources around the world. This would not have been possible some years ago. It is possible today. So we get a much higher level of granularity. So when you ask bridging the information gap, there's still a really big gap in terms of what we can see. Especially, it's really hard to measure impact. But when we're just looking at trying to measure change in the things that companies should be and we expect them to be doing, we are better able to do that today. So the gap is narrowing, which is the good news. So still a long way to go. One of the great things that we found when we published the index was, there was a lot of direct contact to the FTSEs on reporting. And we would find that some companies would say, well, we actually are doing this. We're not maybe reporting on it, but we took the position that it should be possible for anyone. And we did the homework, and we pulled all the data together, but to be able to see what companies are doing. So it is visible, and it's transparent, and it's accessible. So we are basing our data on publicly available sources only, to try and tease out that transparency, because that is another really important aspect of the SDGs. But I can see we're over time, Sophia. So I'm thinking if you wanted to leave questions to the on this particular topic in the Q&A, then I'm happy to stop here.
That would be super. Alexandra, thank you so much to cram so much insight into such a small number of minutes. And I think one of the things that really stands out for me there is this importance about openness and transparency. And how can you hold businesses to account, and how can they really engage with their investors in such a way that they can demonstrate that they are living by the description of their purpose. So we are up for time in this session. I think if I was to summarize so far, I would say that we have a very clear articulation of the importance that purpose has, and the fact that it is compatible with profitability. The fact that actually living that is more than a press release, and that the use of data can really help to empower both the businesses and those that are investing in those businesses to really hold to account and drive, I love that phrase, Alexandra, drive a race to the top. So with races in mind, I'm going to very quickly wrap us up here, and we're all going to race over to the Q&A stage, and we'll see you there shortly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to all of you. And that was really fascinating. And I've seen a number of questions come through. So to everyone that is watching, those of you that have the correct passes, please do go over now to the Q&A to speak to the speakers. Thank you.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.